Hi viewers, welcome back to MasterJSkills. In this video, we will explore all the annotations used in a Spring Boot annotation. Before making much delay, let's get into it. Before diving into all the annotations of a Spring Boot, let's understand what is annotation. So annotation is a tag that represents the metadata that is attached with the class, interface, method or field to indicate some additional information which can be used by containers. So it is nothing but telling the container that this particular class, interface, method or field is doing some functionality in terms of particular annotation. So it tells the container, like for example, @value annotation is used to fetch a property from the file. So this is how it will tell the container. So it's nothing but a tag which represents a metadata. So now let's see what are the annotations used in a Spring Boot application. So I have listed so most of them I will be showing whichever I have used in the EMS application. So Spring Boot application is an annotation is used to mark the main class of this Spring Boot application. So it makes the application entry point and it combines the functionality of at configuration, at enable auto configuration, at component scan annotation. So the next annotation is at auto wired. This annotation is used to auto wire the dependencies by type. It can be applied to field, constructor or setter method. So this is used for dependency injection by type. We can wire by other types as well. This is by default it will auto wire by the type. So with the help of an attribute we can change the by what type you want to auto wire, by constructor, by name, by type. So we can, by default it is by type. So auto wire is for auto wiring the dependencies. So at qualifier, this at qualifier is used along with the at auto wire to specify a particular bean to be auto wired when multiple beans of the same type are available. For example, there are two classes are using the same auto wiring the same class by type by default. When the same classes are auto wiring at a time, then a conflict will arise whether the container has to auto wire by which particular class, which type of a class it has to auto wire. To resolve that conflict, at qualifier is used. So you can see this annotation is used along with auto wire to specify a particular bean to be auto wired when multiple beans of the same type are available. So when have a multiple beans of the same type, then at qualifier. So inside the qualifier we can specify a particular string for that type. In that case the conflict will resolve. The next annotation, at value. So this annotation is used to inject the values from a property file or an environment variables field variables into the fields or a method parameter. So this is basically used to fetch the value from the property files. Next annotation is at configuration. At configuration is used to mark a class as a configuration class in a Spring. It is typically used in combination with at bean annotation. So this particularly it's a class level annotation and it is used to make that particular class as a configuration. For example, if you want to have a completely database configuration inside a particular class, then we can go for a at configuration. We will say the container that this particular class belongs to configuration of something. So other what are the something will be specified in particular field, method or the class. So it tells the container to make this particular class as configurable configuration class. So the next annotation is at bean. So at bean is exactly the same same tag as a bean tag in the XML. So it's a method level annotation. It tells the method to produce a bean to be managed by the container. So it is used with the method. So we will perform some functionality inside a method and it will return some bean, some class. So that class we are making it as a bean. That bean will be managed by the container. So to make that particular returned class as a bean which will be managed by the Spring container, so the bean is used. It tells the method to produce a bean instead of a class. The next annotation is at a component. So it's the same annotation which we use into the Spring framework. So at component, it is a class level annotation. It is used to mark a Java class as a bean. So this is also a bean, and at component is same only, but at bean is used with a method level. At class at component is used at the class level annotation. So it is used to mark a Java class as a bean. A Java class annotated with that component is fine during the class path. The Spring framework pick it up and configure it in the application context as a Spring bean. So the next annotation is at required. It applies to the bean setter method. It indicates that the annotated bean must be populated at configuration time with the required property, else it throws an exception. Bean initialization exception. So this is mandatory to make a particular to make that particular setter method as a setter method property as a required. So mandatory. So at required is for mandatory. If we didn't give if we didn't populate that particular bean in the setter method, then it will throw bean initialization exception. So the next annotation is at enable auto configuration. Auto configures the bean that is present in the class path and configures it to run the methods. It uses this annotation. The use of this annotation is reduced in Spring Boot 1.2 release because the developer provided an alternative of annotation that is at Spring Boot application. So the to enable the auto configuration, this annotation is used. So in later to the 1.2 release, so it is combined with the at Spring Boot application annotation. Let's see the next annotation at controller. So this annotation is to make a class as a controller in a Spring MVC. At service is used for service, to make a class as a service layer. So annotation is specialization of a at component and is used to mark a class as a service bean. At repository is for repository. At REST controller. So this annotation is a specialized version of a at controller that is used to create a RESTful web service. It combines the functionality of at controller and response body annotation. So this is a show short interview question. So what is the difference between controller and REST controller? So how we have saw this at enable auto configuration, exactly same. When we use at controller, we have to write in Spring MVC, we have to return the response body with the help of at response body. So what this will do is it will bind the response to the client values. So but in case of REST controller, this is a combined, that at controller and at response body is combined with the at REST controller. The next annotation is at request mapping. So this annotation is used to map a HTTP request to handler method in a controller. This annotation is used to map a HTTP request to handler method in the controller. It can be applied at a class level or method level. So this is for request mapping the request. So next annotations, I have combined it like get mapping, post mapping, put mapping, delete mapping. So these are specifically for mapping a particular request. Like there are REST methods, that is get, post, put, delete. These methods to map that particular HTTP request methods, these annotations are used. This at get mapping is used for get method, at post mapping is used for post mapping, at put mapping is used for put method, at delete mapping is used for delete method. But this can be used in shortcut with the request mapping itself with an method attribute of request mapping, like at request mapping method equal to request method dot patch. So this is equivalent to this. So these are the related to REST APIs. So the next annotation is path variable. This annotation is used to bind a method parameter to a path variable in the URI template. So when we send some value of the variable in the path, that will be mapped in the map or bind in the method parameter. So that for that path variable is used. So the next annotation is at request parameter. At request param, this annotation is used to bind a method parameter to a request parameter in the query string or a form data. So if you know some knowledge on the REST API, you will get to know there are query string in the request itself. So to bind that particular request parameter, we will be using a at request param. So the next annotation is at request body. This annotation is used to bind the request body to the method parameter in controller. So this is completely the request body. This is to bind the request body to the method parameter in controller. So the next annotation is at request attribute. It binds a method parameter to request attribute. It provides a convenient access to the request attribute from a controller method. With the help of a request attribute annotation, we can access an object that are populated on a server side. So this is basically the request attribute. It binds a parameter to the request attribute. So these are very difficult to understand with theoretically. We will see each one of these annotation with an example. So next is response body. A response body annotation is used to indicate the return value of the method should be serialized and included in the response body. So this is particularly for response body. So it will bind to the response. Next is a transactional. This annotation is used to define the scope of the database transaction on a method or a class. So this is completely related to the database transaction. So it can be a method level as well as a class level. So it indicates that this particular scope is for transaction. The next is at enable auto configuration. This we already know. Next is enable web MVC. This annotation is used to enable the Spring MVC configuration when used with when using a Spring Boot. So in case of a Spring Boot, we can enable web MVC with the help of this annotation. Next is at entity. Is used to make a class as a JPA entity. Table specify a particular or map a particular class to an table, or to specify that particular class table name. Next is to specify class. Next annotation is to specify a column. The next annotation is at ID. This is for to specify primary key. The next annotation is at generated value. This is to generate automatically or serially. So to generate a primary key. Basically it is used to generate the primary key. This is used to denote that particular as the primary key. This is used to generate the key value. Next is a transactional. This we already saw. Next is at valid. This annotation is used to enable a validation on a method parameter or a return value. So for validation, we will be using at valid. Next is at exception handler. Next annotation is at exceptional handler. This annotation is used to handle exception in a controller or advice class. So this is basically used to handle the exception handler. Next is at configuration property. This annotation is used to bind a external configuration properties to the class. So this is for external configuration to the property class. So we will be going to this annotation when we don't want to modify some properties. So it's a very rare to configure. In that case we can go for this, or else we have to if it needs a more modification or more of the value is a dynamic, in that case we will be going for application.properties itself. So next is enable configuration properties. This annotation is used to enable the configuration properties binding. So for binding the properties we will be using this. So next is profiles. Add profile is used to specify active profiles for a beans or a configuration. This is for particularly profiles. So this I think we have already saw in previous video. Next is at qualifier. This annotation is used in conjunction with at wire. So annotation, this we have already discussed. I think it is repeated. Yeah, qualifier is we already discussed. So that's all for today. If you still have any doubts, please drop in the comment box. I'll make sure to clear all your doubts. So if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and please subscribe to MasterJSkills. And thanks again for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video.